On the morning of July 26, 1865, the soldiers of Platte Bridge Station looked on helplessly as the lifeless corpse of the young Lieutenant Casper Collins fell from his horse on the bluffs north of the post. His body rolled down the hill, the arrow that killed him protruding from his forehead. Collins had been leading a small detachment in an attempt to rescue Sergeant Amos Custard and his detail of mostly 11th Kansas cavalrymen arriving with wagons from Willow Springs. As his wagons reached Red Buttes, Sergeant Custer's men would find themselves in a desperate fight for their lives. Join us as we continue the Indian War of 1865 in Episode 3 of Red Cloud's War.
Well, every road I see leads away from me.
You're listening to the Tales of the Trails podcast, produced by Duke Frazier Productions in association with the 11 Bang Bang YouTube channel. I'm your host, Duke Frazier.
Saying, friend, come see what's round the bend. So is it any wonder that I roam?
Sergeant Amos Custard had left Willow Springs early on the morning of the 26th of July, bound for Platte Bridge Station. Under his command were 25 men and 5 wagons. As Custard's advance party came within sight of the bridge about 11 a.m., they heard the discharge of the howitzer, a signal that the natives were near. Hundreds of warriors began to pour into view. Custard would attempt to form up skirmishers to halt the natives' attack, but it would prove ineffective. Corporal James Schrader and Privates Byron Swain, Henry Smith, James Ballou, and Edwin Summers would find themselves separated from the command. They made a desperate flight for the Platte River. The warriors gave chase, overtaking and killing Summers. Private Ballou's horse would be shot from under him before being shot himself. The 3 remaining men made for the station, and despite being pursued by about 20 warriors, they would arrive to the safety of the post. As Corporal Schrader and the others made their escape, Sergeant Custer's remaining men had fallen back to the wagons where they were circled and made into a defensive line. Custard's men were armed with Smith breech-loading percussion carbines, allowing the men to fire 14 rounds per minute. Custard's men would fight desperately for their lives, but by 4 p.m. the soldiers at Platte Bridge no longer heard gunfire and saw smoke from burning wagons. Lieutenant Brentley and 3 men crossed the river to look for Custard's detachment, but were soon turned back by the warriors. As darkness approached, the warriors began to fall back to their camp, where a large celebration would take place. The warriors had killed 28 soldiers. Estimates of warriors killed ranged from 8 to over 200. As the sun rose on the morning of the 27th, hundreds of warriors again lined the hills north of the station. The warriors would destroy 5 miles of telegraph line before dispersing from the field. The Battle of Platte Bridge Station was over. Search parties were organized to find the fallen soldiers. Casper Collins' body was almost unrecognizable. His heart, brains, and bowels had been taken from his body, and his feet and hands had been amputated. 24 arrows pierced his body after it had been wrapped in telegraph wire. It was the same for the other fallen soldiers. On the 28th of July, a 25-man detachment came upon the scene of Custard's men. All the bodies had been mutilated, and there was evidence of men being tortured with hot iron implements. The men would be buried in the battlefield, most of them sharing a single mass grave. In less than a week, the men of the 11th Kansas who had fought valiantly would leave Platte Bridge Station to be mustered out at Fort Kearny. General Patrick E. Connor would take to the field from Fort Laramie on the 30th of July, 1865. His force would number 558 soldiers, 179 Pawnee, Winnebago, and Omaha Indians, and 195 Teamsters. They would proceed north to the Powder River Valley, and on the 14th of August would select a site for the construction of fortifications, which would bear Connor's name for a time. As construction of the post was underway, the Indian scouts were put to work patrolling the area around Fort Connor. During a scrap with a group of Cheyenne, Yellow Woman, stepmother to the Bent brothers, was killed. Skirmishes continued to take place regularly, and the soldiers kept busy in the field. On the 26th of August, Connor's column had broken camp near the future site of Fort Phil Kearny. As the men began to cross Lodgepole Ridge, Jim Bridger, employed as a scout, stated he could see the smoke from a village some 50 miles distant. Connor immediately dispatched Captain Frank North and his Pawnee scouts to find the village. 2 days later, one of North's Pawnee arrived at camp to report that there was indeed a village 35 miles now to the west. Connor organized a force of 300 men. They would ride through the night and attack the village at dawn. Around 8 a.m. on the 29th of August, Connor's column arrived on the hills above the Arapahoe village. Before the attack commenced, Connor told the men to kill as many warriors as they could, but they were not to kill any women or children, and no scalps were to be taken. The Pawnee failed to follow this order. As Connor began the charge, howitzers began firing on the village. The soldiers approached the village, forming a crescent shape. A volley was fired, and chaos commenced as soldiers began to pour into the village. Bullets and arrows filled the air, and despite Connor's orders, women and children would fall alongside the warriors as the battle raged on. Shortly after noon, the soldiers began to destroy the village. Many helped themselves to the abundant amounts of dried buffalo. That which was not claimed was piled onto the teepee poles and burned. By 2:30, the soldiers began to leave the village. Frank North and the Pawnee pushed the horse herd of 500 to 600 ponies ahead of the column. The Arapahoe continued the fight, attempting time and again to recover their ponies until about 11:45 that night. The column would arrive back at the main camp at 3 a.m. the next day. On the final day of August, Connor broke camp and proceeded down the Tongue River in search of Cole and Walker. Connor had sent each of them in command of a column before leaving his own column out at the end of July. As August turned into September, fall weather began to set in. Rain and snow soaked the column. Vast herds of buffalo and elk grazed the prairies, leaving little in the way of forage for Connor's horses. The situation was beginning to grow dire. Colonel Nelson Cole had started his march earlier in July, leading a column east of the Black Hills. On the 22nd of July, men in the 2nd Missouri began to cause trouble, refusing to march. The following day, a stampede resulting in a significant loss of horses was blamed on the troublemakers. To make matters worse, Cole had been unable to find competent guides, and after reaching Bear Butte on August 14th, the guides in his employ disclosed they knew nothing of the country to the west. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Walker's column was ordered to leave Fort Laramie on July 20th. However, the troops under his command refused to march, stating they had signed up to fight rebels, not Indians, and the war they had enlisted in was over. Captain Price, at the request of Walker, arrived with 2 companies of California Cavalry and a detachment of the 11th Ohio Cavalry. Price's detail arrived with a complement of 2 howitzers double-loaded with canister, as a means of persuading the dissidents to get back in line and follow orders. Walker would leave Fort Laramie on August 5th, traveling up the west side of the Black Hills. He would rendezvous with Cole on the 19th of August north of Devil's Tower. After Cole and Walker's forces came together, they proceeded toward the Powder River, arriving on the 30th of August. Unknown to the force, they had struck the Powder River near a large village of Oglala, Brule, Minneconjou, and northern and southern Cheyenne. The village contained close to 6,000 people. On the 1st of September, a small detachment of Company K of the 2nd Missouri Light Artillery came under attack. The warriors succeeded in capturing the horses the detachment had been guarding. The small skirmish would turn into a battle, with Cole estimating the warriors' number between 400 and 500. After the fight on the 1st of September, Cole and Walker's columns would also face the onset of changing weather, and on the 3rd of September decided to march back to Fort Laramie. As the sun began to set on the 4th of September, a small skirmish would take place between 15 men of the 12th Missouri Cavalry and 75 warriors. Fighting would continue the following day, with the 12th Missouri Cavalry and the 2nd Missouri Light Artillery holding their positions for 3 hours as warriors harassed the troops. At 8 a.m., the Cheyenne and Lakota made a massive charge, with a wave of 1,000 warriors charging the line of soldiers. The charge was a disaster, as the 3-inch artillery guns proved effective in stopping the charge. By 10 a.m., the warriors had given up the fight. Cole would estimate that 200 to 600 warriors were wounded or killed in the fight. Cole would move his troops further up the Powder, and on the 8th of September would again face a large engagement. The advanced guard of 25 men of the 16th Kansas Cavalry were a mile ahead of the column when they were suddenly surrounded by hundreds of warriors. The men fell back, losing one man in the fight. Walker formed a skirmish line and began moving the warriors back. A hunting party that had left camp earlier in the morning also fell under attack and were rescued by Captain Boardman. The Battle of the 8th of September would involve between 3,000 to 4,000 warriors, making it one of the largest engagements to ever take place in the Northern Plains. Lieutenant Charles Springer would say that they were thicker than fiddlers in hell. The soldiers would successfully push the warriors back. Despite being an engagement with such large forces, Cole noted that the warriors did not fight with the same vigor as in the previous days. As the warriors left the field, another winter storm descended upon the troops and would kill 414 horses. As animals died, troops were forced to abandon equipment and supplies. On the 15th of September, Connor's scouts would discover Cole and Walker's commands in desperate condition. Connor gave the men orders to proceed to Fort Connor. They would make camp 5 miles away on the 20th of September. As Connor was preparing to reorganize Cole and Walker's men for another offensive operation, he received orders to cease the campaign. Connor would return to Fort Connor on the 26th of September and proceed to Fort Laramie a few days later. Connor's Powder River campaign ended in disaster. As the volunteer troops began mustering out, warriors resumed their attacks, leaving a trail of destruction once again along the Platte in late October. The attacks would continue through November, with troops scrambling to stop the raids. As the winter set in, the fighting season would come to a close. Then, on the 29th of December, a small glimmer of hope would present itself to Colonel Henry Maynadier, the new commander at Fort Laramie. Red Cloud had sent word to the colonel expressing friendship and wanting to seek peace. The end of the conflict seemed to be on the horizon. Next time on Tales of the Trails, the government sends peace delegations to negotiate peace and safe travel of the Bozeman Trail, while the military sends soldiers to establish forts along it. Join us in the next episode of Red Cloud's War, the Peace Treaty of 1866.
All the places I have been.
Tales of the Trails is produced by Duke Frazier Productions. Music performed by Garrett Woods from the 11 Bang Bang YouTube channel. Sources for this episode may be found in the description field below. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe. Click the bell to receive notification of new episodes. Until next time, keep your powder dry.
Calls me as it goes.